You feeling this morning? You okay? I mean, I'm feeling great walking out after that track, right? Like, I don't know if you're a guy in the room, I don't know how you hear that song and not just be like, yes, I am, yes, I am, yes, I am. Like, I don't know what the mirror was telling you today, but walking in hot after I'm the man. And you could be a woman in the room, you'd be like, that song really doesn't appeal to me, right? It doesn't really have my sound. You can just be like, I'm the woman, I'm the woman, I'm the woman. Yeah, you can tell everybody. Anyways, I'm not a singer, so there it is. My name's Justin Chandler. I'm one of the pastors here at the church if we haven't had a chance to meet yet. So glad that you're here. You're joining us in week 6 of a series we've called I Quit. And I don't know if you've ever kind of shown up towards the end of something or been at the end of the movie and kind of felt like I've missed out on all these segments before and I don't really understand what happened at the end. One of the things I love about this series is we've been kind of taking it just week by week, and so this will be its own independent. But what I'd love to do today is help to kind of recap where we've been at, but also give some context as to how I landed where I am today, because our series has been about these negative characteristics, negative attributes that have been a part of our life, and what would it be like for each one of us if we made the decision, I'm gonna stop doing that thing, I'm gonna stop receiving the consequences or whatever happens because I do that. What would it be like if I quit? And so what we did months ago is we kind of threw up a bunch of ideas, like what would it be like, or what are some certain things that we could say if we quit that would really help us and it'd help others. And so here's the list, kind of here's what we threw up on this whiteboard, and here's week 1. In week 1, Andrew kicked off our series and he said, the biggest thing that's holding each one of us back in our lives is the excuses we make, right? We'll say, I have this reason for this, or I have this reason for that. Now, when we look at other people, we call that an excuse. When we look at ourselves, we call it a reason, right? So we had this moment where we can see with crystal clarity in others, but we have to overlook ourselves. And so he said, if we quit making excuses, kind of what would that be for our lives? And so that was week number 1. Week number 2, Tim did that. And if you've been a part of this series or kind of the intro to it, every time Tim talked about this series, he talked about week 2, which was I quit being a jerk. He just would every week, right? He'd be like, hey, week number 1 is gonna be about making excuses. Week number 2 is gonna be quit being a jerk, because he was all hyped on that. And I don't know if that's a reflection of his personality or not, but that was where he kept going, I'm gonna quit being a jerk, quit being a jerk. And just the opportunity that is in our day, what would it be like if we quit doing that? In week number 3, Andrew led again and talked about lying. That's one of the things that from your earliest ages, like no one had to teach you, right? And if you've had young children, you realize like how quickly lying shows up, right? And then you think, that's gotta be your friends from school. That's where it came from, right? But it's one of those things that's like inside of each one of us. And then what could it be like if we lived free and in truth and just let lying not have the impact that it has had on our lives? In week 4, Tim continued the series and talked about complaining, right? That each one of us has been given this venue called social media to be able to run off at the mouth, or just interactions that we have with people. Like, I don't know if you have like the Nextdoor app on your phone. It just seems like that creates another venue for neighborhoods to do that. And it's so easy in our day to complain. It's so easy in our day to run off at the mouth. But rather than complaining, rather than finding these holes, God invites us to put on a new wardrobe and for us to live in a different light. In week number 5, Andrew kind of continued, I don't want to call it the social media theme, but Andrew kind of continued the impact of that and comparing, right? That we have these people that we can look at, these people we can compare ourselves to. There's always somebody behind us and there's always somebody in front of us we're competing against. And so rather than comparing our lives with other people or their highlight reels, we wanted to say, like, we want to be able to look at our lives, to be thankful what we have, to celebrate, be grateful, and to live our lives going forward. And then this last week for Mother's Day, Tim and Sue spoke about worrying, that's not something unique to moms or to parents, but since we were kids, we worried about things that were happening at school, and then now that we've become adults, they're just bigger and more expensive, right? And so we've talked about worrying. And so we had this list, and when I looked at it, I was like, okay, so how are we supposed to end this thing? Like, what's the best way for us to come to a close? But it was a pretty open book. It's like, you can talk about whatever you like, whatever appeals to you most. I don't know if you look at this list, those aren't necessarily like appealing topics to try to describe yourself. So I looked at this, and so I went to really wise wisdom, where I said to my wife, I was like, hey, so I've got these couple of topics. Which one do you think I should talk about? So we had this dialogue about it, and she chose 2. She said, if you're gonna come at it and you're gonna speak from your perspective, I feel like there's 2 that you should have, right? And some of you are already guessing what those are, but here's the 2 that she selected. The first one was picking fights, and the second one was needing to be right. Now, when she said picking fights, my first reaction was like, you're gonna do this right now? Like, this is how we're gonna approach this topic. Like, you're ready to go because you're saying we're gonna start picking fights. And so I realized, like, because I was already hot about that topic, like, that is not the best one for me to share. And so then I looked at this needing to be right. And from the beginning, I felt like this was something that I should talk about, but here's the tension I faced, right? It felt like something I should do, but I didn't want to. Because most of my perspective with speakers or preachers or anybody who does this kind of thing is they come at it from a position of like expertise. They come at it with knowledge. They come at it with background. And they can look back and say, hey, I made this decision a little while ago. I stopped doing that. And I want to ask you to stop doing that too. Here's what I'm going to tell you about today. That is not what's about to happen, right? That is not where I'm at. I'm in a spot today where I have not quit doing that. I recognize I need to stop doing that. And so I'm in the point of decision where I'm making a choice today to quit. And there's this line that I've had in my head for a little bit. It's this line that we'll throw up on the screen for you. It says, some of the best messages are the ones I speak to myself. Now, I have a unique perspective in that because speaking is what I do for a living, right? The venues like this and groups of people that's there. But the reality is that you speak to people too, and you speak to yourself. Like you could say, you don't know me. Like I'm not a schizophrenic. Like I'm not talking into the voices in the mirror. I'm like, every one of us looks in the mirror and we're either waking up going like, I'm the man, I'm the man, I'm the man. You can tell. We do that. Or we have those moments where we go, what happened? Like, what happened last night? Like, why am I showing up here? Every one of us has these moments. And in reality, you're probably telling yourself some stuff right now that if you just listen to yourself, it'd have a really big impact on your life. Right? And so here today, I'm going, oh, I know what I need to do. I didn't expect that it was gonna come up this quickly, but here we are. And so when I said yes to Jesus, I found that like a pattern of my life that had been true from the beginning was carrying over into Christianity. I mean, from my earliest years, I cared about being right. Right on my homework, right in conversations, right about arguments, right about facts. Like I don't know why it was or why it started, but I just felt this need to be right because I hated being wrong. I hated that moment where someone was like, you're wrong about that. And I wanted to be the person who was like, no, I'm not, I got this. Like, it felt that way. And instead, when I came into Christianity, that wasn't something that like got corrected in me. If anything, I felt like I had new evidence and new reasons to be true that way. And there's this quote I'll throw up on the screen. I think it'll help to paint a little bit of context. It says this, an inspired book in the hands of the wrong people is frankly dangerous. If they're still egocentric, if they still need to be right, if they still need to triumph over their enemies, don't give them the Bible because they'll find 100 texts to justify it. And history now proves that. Like, haven't you found that to be true sometimes? That there's moments with Christians where this like book that's supposed to be like the language of love and God's reflection towards us has become like this weapon of war. That people use it to win arguments and to triumph over people. And I found that the Bible was doing that for me. So even take last week, Tim and Sue shared Philippians 4:8. And we'll throw this up on the screen for you. It says this. It says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever's true, whatever's noble, whatever's right, whatever's pure, whatever's lovely, whatever's admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And I read that verse and I found two words that justified all of my behavior, true and right. That I could focus on those things. I could pay attention to those things. I could dwell on those things and they would be excellent and praiseworthy. And I was like, yes, now I have even more obligation to be right. And so this was something that's like a blind spot in my life, right? I didn't see this. I either didn't have friends that were telling me or I just completely ignored that information. But early on in our marriage, my wife made this statement to me. She said, you can't leave a wrong statement alone. I was like, well, what do you mean by that? So we were having this conversation with a guy and we were talking about, and they were just talking some stuff out and he said something that was wrong. Like, I don't know if you've sat there, but I'm the guy who's like, not true. Like we need to circle back. We need to come around here. That thing was not true. And when we left, like I felt like I was valiant, right? I think I did the right thing. I was like holding it down for truth and justice. And she's like, why did you feel the need to do that? I was like, because he was wrong. Like that was not true. And she's like, but it doesn't matter. Like it was a completely meaningless statement. I was like, but it was a wrong one. And she's like, and it changed the rest of the conversation from that point on because you told him he was wrong. And now the tone was completely different. And so I sat there and I was like, consider. I was like, well, actually, this is what happened, right? I had this moment where we dialogued about it. And even recently, like people have asked me about it. Like you could say, like, what about a restaurant, right? That someone, like there could be a restaurant in Edinger and someone could say, hey, it's on beach. I'm the person who would say, it's not on Edinger, not correct. Because I don't want you to drive around in the wilderness trying to find this restaurant. Like I know you've got maps that you can GPS your way there, but I want to be a service to you. I want to be helpful, right? So this was a tension that I sat in, and in marriage, right? You know, most things take a little while for you to overcome, so she just kind of let me have it. And then I started to figure out, so okay, if this is going to create some divide with people, well, I'll just change my approach. So I introduced this word to my vocabulary, this phrase. I would say, well, actually. And I would try to be nice with it, right? I would try to be like, well, actually, as if that would soften the blow, right? Well, actually, And what I've realized, even with the song we sang and some of the dialogue this morning, I mean, the mirror is one of the most aggressive teachers we have. Right? You can't hide a lot. And so my problem is, I have a mirror that's 29 and 27 years younger than me, and my 7-year-old and 5-year-old son. And so my oldest son, Jude, he and I were talking the other day, and we were sharing about some stuff, and he said this statement to me. He said, well, actually, and I was like, oh, here we go. I was like, what does a 7-year-old will actually do when it meets a 34-year-old one? I'm like, I've been doing this for years. Well, actually, all right, and we'll like start to go. You can see I've got problems. And then my 5-year-old kind of did the same thing about a different topic. He came up to me and he was like, well, actually, and I was like, you pronounce the L's right and you can drop that statement. Otherwise, you need to leave the well, actually alone, right? Well, actually, all right? And so it's like, we've got issues, right? And so here's what I've realized. Like, I've shared this message twice. Like I shared it last night with Saturday night, and this thing came up again. That last night, Rachel said to me, she's like, hey, can you go grab Micah's blanket from the living room? And I was like, it's Jude's blanket. And she was like, and there it is again. I was like, but it is. Like, I felt this like, but it doesn't matter, right? Just go grab the blanket and bring it back to the room and let the kids go to bed. Like, why, who cares what it is? So here's what I'm doing. I'm making the decision today. I realize I need to quit, and odds are by the time I get home, I will have already stumbled again. And my hope would be in today that you would make the decision to quit too. And so as like a straight up kind of person, I'm like, just give me the most aggressive version, right? Come at me, I can handle it. I'm a man. I was like, so what would the Bible have to say about this? And so here's the most aggressive version of this. It's Proverbs 12:15. It says, stupid people always think they're right. Well, all right, you guys have a good day? We're out, call it, we're done. Like, I read that and I was like, man, Bob, I don't need you to be that aggressive. Like, we can slow play this a little bit. Like, you didn't have to call me stupid, right? And it felt that way. And so here's what I'd love for you to do. If you brought a Bible with you today, you can open up to 1 Corinthians chapter 8. If you don't have a Bible, you can download it from the YouVersion app. It's available on every app store. You can use your browser to get there. But we're going to read 1 Corinthians chapter 8, and we're going to kind of dialogue around this. I'm going to give you the good cop version of this statement. So here's one of the things that I've come to love about the Bible in my time and experience with it. I love that every literary genre on the planet is covered within the Bible, right? It's got the narrative, right? The story about how things started. It's got psalms and songs for people who like to read. It's got these apocalyptic and prophetic kinds of genre that if things are going troubling, if there's troubling circumstances for people, it can speak to that. It's got biographies. It's got letters. Like every kind of writing you could imagine, it's in there. But not only that, it's covered known human history. That in the thousands of years that people have recorded what's been going on, the Bible's been in every one of those. And it's had a way to speak to those specific people groups in some of the most influential areas on the planet in the history of human beings. And so it's been cool to see the way that like something written to that group of people could still make its way towards us. And as they put this thing together, we have a chance to not only enter into that, but to see that it still impacts and affects us too. And so the book we're reading today is a letter written by this guy named Paul to this people who lived in a city called Corinth. Now, if you went to Greece, like on the south side and in the middle, you would see a city called Corinth. You could go visit there today. And it would be a great vacation because doesn't everybody want like the Greek cruise? That would be such a sweet deal. And so you've got Corinth as a city, and the people who live there are called Corinthians, right? I don't know if they call us Costamacians, but it would be kind of this similar thing, right? So Corinthians would be there. And so this guy named Paul, he would travel around and he would help to start churches. And so there's this church that met in Corinth. And so years later, he wrote a letter to them. Like he had heard some of the things that were going on the inside and wanted to write a letter back to them just to kind of play catch up on the couple of years that they had missed. Now, one of the things that we'll miss out on is like in hearing this guy named Paul, you're like, okay, that's cool. And then to hear this letter to this people, you're like, that's great. One of the things we'd miss is who this guy was. And so Paul actually described himself to another church in another letter that we're going to throw up on the screen for you. It's in the book of Galatians. And it says this. It says, you know what I was like when I followed the Jewish religion, how I violently persecuted God's church. I did my best to destroy it. I was far ahead of all my fellow Jews in my zeal for the traditions of my ancestors. And now, so committed to being right, he was willing to destroy other people. Right? Not just like in words or in thoughts, not buildings and documents, not people's reputations, like literally destroy people. And he called it zeal. He called it passion. He was like, I'm just so passionate about this thing that if someone disagrees, I'll destroy them. Like, I don't know if that's how you feel about the need to be right, but this is a unique way. And the first person who ever was killed because they had the name of Jesus was this guy named Stephen. And Stephen's job in the church was to feed widows and orphans, right? A terrible human being. And so they had him and they put him on trial and they found him guilty and they said that he was deserving to die. And a biographer helps to capture what happens in this moment. Again, we'll throw it on the screen for you. It says this. So they dragged Stephen out of the city and they began to stone him. His accusers took off their coats and they laid him at the feet of a young man named Saul. Saul was one of the witnesses and he agreed completely with the killing of Stephen. Now, I don't know if you've thrown anything in your life, but if you have a coat on, it's not the easiest to be able to throw stuff, right? So these guys were so committed to killing Stephen. They took their coats off and they laid him at the feet of this guy named Saul. Now, this is the same guy, Paul, that we're talking about. Like, he had such a reputation that they changed his name because he just had all of this dirt and grime on the other side. And when Saul heard that this guy named Stephen was gonna be killed, he approved of it. Why? Because he was right and Stephen was wrong. And so they were willing to kill him over a disagreement, right? That's a unique person to be. So when Paul writes a letter, we could think, man, this is gonna be a unique person to respond to. And I want you to see the way that he dialogues around one particular issue, all right? So it's in 1 Corinthians chapter 8. So we'll start up in verse 1. Here's what it says. Now about food sacrificed to idols. Now you could immediately kind of step back and say, well, that doesn't apply to my life at all, right? Because I don't know what you had for breakfast today. I don't know what you're intending to have for lunch, but odds are you're not gonna get a plate that sits before a panther with 2 fireballs in its hand and lightning for a tail, and you're not gonna bow and worship it and grab your plate. Odds are that's not how that went down. But throughout human history, people have argued about what to eat, right? That there's a group of people that feels like they can eat whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want. And there's another group of people that's a little bit more selective on their diet. Right, so you could imagine what it'd be like for these two groups of people to get into the room, right? One saying, hey, anything and everything, I'm eating that. And there's another group that's like, do you know where that's come from? Do you know what they did to that? Have you seen the process that goes through? Do you know how they make chicken nuggets? Watch this YouTube video. Are you sure you want to do that? And there's a person who's like, tangy barbecue sauce, I'm gonna eat it all, right? You can see how there would start to be a divide. And so you could expect that Paul, being one of the selective eating guys, that he would say, now about this, you need to stop it and knock it off because I'm right and you're wrong. You could see how that goes. I want you to listen to what he says. Here's the next part. He says, we all know that we all possess knowledge. Now that's an interesting take, right? If you're approaching a disagreement between two people and you walk in and you're like, listen guys, I know we've all got something to say here and we know a little something about it. Right? That's a unique pivot point from a guy who was so convinced he was right, he wanted to destroy people. So that was part number one. Now I want you to see kind of how he continues after that, because this could be and you're wrong, but this is what he says next. He says, knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. And again, that's an interesting take, right? Because he was so convinced he was right. He was so convinced that he was on the right side of this argument, and he said, here's what knowledge is gonna do to you. Knowledge is gonna make you puff up your shoulders a little bit. It's gonna make you speak more boldly, more confidently, more certainly. Why? Because you're right. Knowledge causes us to be that way. And I don't know if there's ever been a circumstance where that's been true for you, but when you know you're right, or you know you've got a little something, you're like, oh, I'm about to introduce a good one here, right? If you know new music that no one's heard, you're like, oh, I'm about to share something with you, watch this, right? Or if you know a good restaurant to eat at, you're like, oh, you guys don't even know, right? Knowledge has a way of puffing up, but what knowledge will do is it'll isolate you against everybody else, and it'll make you think you're the man, you're the truth, you're the pillar, and then it isolates everyone else. But love does the completely inverted thing. Rather than building you up, love builds us up. Love is not about an individual, love is about us together, right? Love, you can't have love for yourself and have it just impact you. Love is something to be shared. And so he said, knowledge is gonna make you stand on the side and say, I am right. And it's gonna make that person stand and say, I am right. But what would it be like if the two of us came together and we said, out of love for each other, we can recognize we all got a little bit of knowledge. Now, if that's the lead-in, here's the good cop version of the verse I shared a little bit earlier. It's verse 2. It says, those who think they know something do not yet know as they ought to know. That have you ever had one of those moments where you thought you knew what was going on and then you realized, I don't really know? So I'm gonna share a story with you real quick because it happened over the weekend. On Friday, my boys and I, we were playing handball. Now, I don't know if you have kids who are in elementary school, but handball has taken over the world, right? And so my son comes home, he's like, Dad, do you wanna play handball? I'm like, yeah, I got this, we can play handball, right? So my version of handball is hit the ball against the wall and you try to do the same thing. That's not how they do it these days, right? They've got 97,000 rules for how you're supposed to play handball. So he's like, all right, Dad, here's the rules. Know this, know this, know this, know this, know this. I'm like, what are all these things? So here's two easy ones. There's a rule called two-hand catchies, that if someone hits the ball into the wall and they catch it with two hands, it's a redo. I'm like, that's a we can't hit it backy. That's what I like to call that one, right? And there's another one that he has, it's called black magic. That if the ball is flying in the air and you swing underneath it, you get a redo because it's black magic. And I'm like, no, that's called a missy. That's like, I don't know how your friends have deceived you, but that thing is called a missy. So we started playing. I'm like, Jude, can we just play the game where we hit the ball against the wall? He's like, yeah, Dad, it's called old school. I'm like, that's what I'm talking about. There's no school like the old school. Let's go. And he's like, Dad, here's the 3 rules for old school. I'm like, no, hit the ball against the wall. Let's go. So we start playing. And my son wants to beat me these days. Like as he's 7, he's coming to the like, I'm gonna take my dad, I got him, right? So I was like, man, I was in athletic shorts, had my phone in my pocket, and I felt like swinging around a couple $100 in my pants just isn't the wisest idea. So I took it out and I put it on my truck and we kept playing. And then my wife said, hey, Justin, can you help me with Cohen, get him loaded up before I go? I was like, oh yeah. So I go inside, I grab Cohen, I'm swinging him, lock him into the truck, and I'm like, all right guys, let's go inside. We go inside and I'm walking around the house and I'm like, man, where'd I put my phone? So I check all the usual places, looked at all the spots I've done this before, and none of them are true. And so my wife will have this moment happen from time to time, and she always leaves her phone on vibrate. So we use the like Find My iPhone feature, right? We can page that thing like it's a missing child. So I find one of the devices and I look it up and I'm like, where's my phone? And all of a sudden it shows up and it's on Fairview. I'm like, oh, she picked it up, she put it in the truck, that's great. And then Find My iPhone zoomed out again, and she was by Fashion Island. And I was like, uh-oh. I was like, boys, saddle up. Let's go, get into the car. So we drive, and I saw where it's at. It's at Fairview and Paularino. So if you know that, it's right before the 405. So I started driving over there, and I saw it in the road. I was like, oh, there's my phone. So I turned on the street, parked it. I was like, boys, hang out here. And I'm like waiting for traffic, right? It's like the adult version of Frogger. So I'm waiting there, pacing it out. I run out and grab my phone, and I'm like, ooh, it's like face down. I'm like, it lived. Here's a picture of the after, right? We'll put this up on the screen for you. My phone, it did not live. Right? That's all missing, and if you went further down, it's all missing. And so I posted this picture because I was like, hey, anybody got a spare phone I can borrow? Like, we're destroyed right now. And someone was like, hey, you can replace the screen. I'm like, I know. If I pick this thing up in my hands, it crumbles. Like I can feel it crunching. That ain't a screen repair. That is dead, right? So here's where we're at. And here's what this helps to illustrate. When you think you know, it's that moment where you're like, oh, the phone's on Fairview. And then it zooms out a little bit. And there's these circumstances that we get really close to that we're like, I know, like I am right about this. I know what this is. And then you also had those moments where you've seen life zoom out a little bit, take a little bit of a higher view, and you go, oh, I don't know at all, right? Those who think they know do not yet actually know. And so here's the last part. And if we talk about knowledge and we talk about knowing things, just listen to the way that he concludes these couple of verses. Here's the last little part. It's verse 3. It says, but whoever loves God is known by God. We start with food. We start with conflict. We recognize we all possess knowledge. Those who think they know do not yet know. And yet whoever loves God is known by God, right? He makes this the central issue again. He comes back to, but if you love God, God knows you. And that's a different kind of knowledge. That's not a need to be right kind of knowledge. That's a life-changing, life-altering, we can find people who don't agree with us about everything kind of knowledge. And he brought them back to the heart of how this whole thing began. That if you love God and you give your life to God, the God of the universe knows you. And you could walk into the room today and say, Justin, I love God, man, and I feel like he doesn't know. I feel like there's circumstances that are going on. I feel like there's ways that are missing. I feel like God has no idea what's going on. And we got to hold on to this one. And we have to believe that the God who loves us actually knows us and knows what we're going through. And you could walk into the room today and say, I don't know God, I don't love God. We're gonna create an opportunity for you at the end that I would love for you to experience the most transformative thing that'll ever happen in your entire life. For the God of the universe to reach down and to say, I know you. So you've got this group of people convinced they're right. They know the right issues, they know the right responses, they know the right circumstances, and they're so convinced they're right, they know who's in and they know who's out. Now you could read these couple of verses and say, that was nice, Justin, that was cool. But this is a line that goes throughout this entire book. So here's the 3rd chapter of this same letter. Here's what he says. He says, do not deceive yourselves. If any of you think you are wise by the standards of this age, you should become fools so that you may become wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness in God's sight. As it is written, he catches the wise in their craftiness. Now, I love that last line, right? He catches the wise in their craftiness. It's like someone's plotting on something, and they're like, I'm the man, I'm the man, I'm the man. And the way God pivots it, this is the way I would paraphrase it. We'll throw it up there too. It's as if God says, well, actually, This is God's response in that moment, like, oh, you thought you were the man now, but let me just kind of like pull back a little bit and show you something. Now, here's what I don't want you to hear from today. I don't want you to hear that there's no moments where anybody's right, because that's not at all what I'm saying, right? There are certain areas and certain things that are definite rights and definite wrongs. Like, we can all unanimously agree about that. But what is true is we can't make everything right and wrong. Right? We can't make everything about needing to be right and pivot in the situation. We have to come out of that. And I have a friend of mine, she made this statement a little while ago. And what's been really cool about this is I've had a chance to see statements she's made show up in a couple different messages and venues, which I just think helps to speak to her impact. And here's a statement she made. It's, if you forget everything about today, I'd love for you to remember this one line. The line is this, that there's a difference between being right and needing to be right. Because the heart behind those things are two totally different issues, right? There's a difference when you're like, hey, I'm right here. Because if you ever had a moment where you're right and you just don't need to prove it, you just know, like, I'm right and I don't need to argue with you about it, right? But there's a difference in when I need to be right, I have to prove everybody else wrong. I have to prove that this is in fact right. And what would it be like for you and I if rather than needing to be right, we just settled and say, man, we all possess some knowledge about this. And my knowledge about this could cause me to get puffed up. It could get me to be conceited. But rather than leading that way, I'm gonna lead out of love. I'm gonna let this circumstance be something that builds us up. What if we quit leading life like that? And what if we trusted that the God of the universe who knows us and who loves us is in fact right? And because he is, I don't need to be anymore. I don't have to be right about all things because I know that he is. And I just get to be a person who gets to live in that and get to experience the tension and the beautiful way that happens. I think it would be a way for you and for I to be free. And I recognize today, right, I am not coming at this as an expert. When I go home today, I can almost guarantee you something's gonna come up where my primary reaction is gonna be, well, actually. And I'm gonna need to grow out of that, right? But what would it be like for me to be free? Man, I'm making the decision today to quit. And I would hope today you would too. So here's the ways we have to say yes. Our church has been helping people say yes for 29 years. And here's the ways I feel like we could say yes today. For some of you, when you walk into the room, like you've never been part of a church, you've never sat in a room like this, and this is a new experience for you, but you would want to say yes to Jesus. Like if there's a God who knows me and who loves me, I want to say yes. And there's some of you who for today, when you're coming into the room, you're making a comeback. Like today's been a day where you've had some distance between you and your relationship with God, and today it's brand new, and you'd want to say yes to Jesus. I'm gonna invite you to say yes to that. For some of you, you're in the camp that I'm in. Like you've got some need to be right moments and you just want to let those go. That today you're making the decision to quit. And there's a third group of people that potentially you're like the Corinthians. You had an issue that created a rift between you and a person, and you have someone that you need to talk to. You have a phone call you need to make. You have a car and a door you need to knock on, right? You've got some circumstances you need to resolve, and we're gonna invite you to say yes to that. So as we get ready to close today, if you could do me a favor, if you could stand up to your feet. And what I'm gonna invite you to do as you stand up is I'm gonna invite you to bow your head. I'm gonna invite you to close your eyes, not because there's anything magical about that posture, but you know and I know when we walk in, we got a lot of stuff bustling on. We're all starting to get hungry because it's the afternoon now. Like we got a lot of things. But just for a couple minutes, as you just kind of take a pause, if you could bow your head, and if you can close your eyes, I'm just gonna invite you to say yes and to lift your hands. And so if you're in the room today and you're saying, hey, I wanna say yes to Jesus, right? You're either saying yes to Jesus for the first time or maybe today you're making a comeback. Could you lift your hand up real high? Because I wanna be able to pray for you. So if you're saying yes to Jesus either for the first time or today you're making a comeback, lift your hand up real high. Wow, yeah, thanks for lifting your hands up. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's so awesome, thank you. To the second crew, if you're saying, hey, I got some things I need to quit being right about. I've got some circumstances and some things I know I'm in the I quit needing to be right camp. Could you lift your hand up real high too? Because I'm gonna pray for you. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for lifting your hands up. All right, and to the last group of people, if you're like, hey, I know somebody that I need to talk to. There was an issue that I needed to be right about, and it created some distance in that relationship. If that was you, could you lift your hand up real high too? Because I'm gonna be able to pray for you. Thank you so much. All right, let's pray together. Jesus, I want to thank you so much for today. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here. I want to thank you for all the different circumstances and all the different ways that brought us to this room and brought us to this moment. But I want to thank you for the God of the universe who knows us and who loves us and cared for us so much that he would put himself on the cross, and where we were so wrong, we were dead wrong in certain things, he gave up his life so that we could be made right. And you give us that promise today, Jesus, that if we trust in you and if we love you, that all the things that separated us from you before are now dead and gone. And that we get to live a brand new life because you've come out of that tomb alive. And I thank you, Jesus, for the dozens of people who lifted their hands today who said, I want to say yes to Jesus. I pray that the same power that raised you from the dead would be the same power that transforms every human heart, that we would get to know you and experience your love. God, for those of us who are in the room who feel the need to be right, who feel this moment where we feel the difference between right and wrong and so passionately want to lean in, I pray today, Jesus, you would set us free from that. You would let us be free from we all possessing knowledge and we all feeling like we're right. God, I pray that we wouldn't be stupid people, but I pray that we would think and to see, but God, you would zoom out and show us the bigger picture. And then God, we would let our lives and our love be something that builds up rather than isolates. And God, for every person who feels like there's a phone call to be had, a person to make up with, God, I pray that there would be courage in that moment. God, I pray that they'd make the decision to hop in the car, to drive to the house, to knock on the door. I pray that they would pick up the phone and have the conversation. And God, I pray that they would say sorry, that there's no issue worth losing a relationship for. And I pray today, God, that we would see you make amends in our lives in the same way you made amends with the Corinthians. And we pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Amen. If you said yes today, inside of your bulletin, there's a little card that says, say yes. I'd love for you to fill it out. I'll connect with you this week and follow up. And if you're new here at the Crossing, out in the Purple Hut across the way, we've got Guest Connect. I'd love to see you there. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next weekend.